motion be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Bean for raising this very, very important question. I have recently become the chair of the National Capital and External Territories Committee, of which the member for Bean is also on the committee, and I look forward to the ongoing investment in these very, very important structures, these nationally important structures around Canberra, telling Australia's story and why it is important. I'd like to quote the member for Tangney, who was the chair at the time the report was tabled. "Canberra is the heart of the nation and home to some of its most iconic national institutions. These institutions tell our Australian story. It is essential that we understand that story, learn from it, and use it to build confidence and pride for the present and future. This report considers the shared values of Canberra's national institutions in conserving, interpreting and facilitating engagement with Australia's history, culture and national identity." I do want to respond to the motion that has been put because while the government acknowledges the work of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Capital and External Territories, it's also important to thank that committee for the report, telling Australia's story and why it's important. As the motion has identified, the report has made 20 recommendations. I've been consulting with my colleagues about these recommendations, and they are directly relevant to several portfolios across government. The government's full response to Telling Australia's Story report will be tabled in the coming months, but I do not accept that there has been inaction by the government when it comes to supporting our national institutions. And in fact, just recently I had the great pleasure of riding a bike around the inner section of Canberra, which actually takes you quite a way out, to look at some of the National Capital. It was wonderful, actually. I hopped on the bike and followed the National Capital Authority's Chief Planning Officer. He rides much faster than I do. And I enjoyed seeing all of our wonderful buildings and reflecting on what that holds for us as a nation. It was very exciting, and I can highly recommend it to anyone. The government's full response to Telling Australia's Story report will be tabled in the coming months, as I said. Over the past 3 years, however, the government has announced additional funding of more than $700 million in support of the National Institutes in Canberra. $63.48 million through the Public Service Modernisation Fund to support the following Canberra-based institutions: the Australian War Memorial, the National Capital Authority, National Film and Sound Archive of Australia, National Gallery of Australia, National Library of Australia, National Museum of Australia, National Portrait Gallery and Old Parliament House. If people have not, in my electorate, who have not been to Canberra and have not had the pleasure of seeing those buildings, I highly encourage you, once we're through this pandemic, to make a trip. It is wonderful. $16.6 million has been provided to the National Gallery of Australia as part of a package to deliver $25.6 million in capital works. That was in the 2017-18 budget. $498 million for the expansion of the Australian War Memorial to 18-19 budget. $63.8 million uplift on ongoing funding for the National Gallery of Australia, 2018-19. $15.1 million to enable Questacon to expand its education and outreach programs, 2019-20 budget. $10 million for the National Library of Australia Treasured Voices Digitisation Fund, 2019-20 budget. $7.36 million to deliver capital works at the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia, National Library of Australia, National Museum of Australia and the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House. $12.7 million to deliver capital works at the National Film and Sound Archives of Australia, the National Library of Australia, the National Museum of Australia and the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House, and $5.5 million to the National Film and Sound Archive to enable it to digitise its at-risk audiovisual collection, and a further $8 million to the National Library of Australia for it to continue its ongoing delivery of the Trove platform. Mr Deputy Speaker, the national icons of Australia many are to be found in this wonderful Australian Capital Territory, and I would encourage all members to visit these sites.
The question.